Our guest for today is Armando. I want to say thank you so much for coming to join us, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to answer our questions. I'm wondering if you could first talk a little bit about what initially attracted you to the construction industry and how you first got involved in it.
Yeah, so I'm from Venezuela, and most of my family, they're all engineers. My grandfather is a civil engineer, so that's kind of where my interest started. And I worked in a few construction sites back home. I really liked it. And at first, I wasn't really sure what about construction I liked in particular, but I always thought like buildings are, they're so tangible, and it just seemed like a really cool thing. So I went into school for engineering, and I really loved it. And I think it was more design related. So I was very unsure whether I wanted to go into the design side of things or construction, because I always liked math and science, but there was something about construction that I really liked, and I had a really good project management professor in school that kind of helped me or pushed me to go a little bit into project management, and that's how I started working in construction.
That's interesting that you had a professor specifically focused on project management. So I'm wondering, do you think that kind of led you to pursue project management, and did that prepare you well, you think, having that relationship or someone specifically focusing on that in terms of preparing you for becoming a project manager?
Yeah, I think like this was a project management course in my undergraduate education. And it was a little bit of a different course in the sense that the professor was not an academic, but he was brought from the industry to teach this course in specific. So he really shared a lot of industry experience, what he was doing. And it's something that you hadn't seen before. Like most professors just teach their own subjects, and they're not consultants or designers in particular. So it kind of got my interest going in project management. So I started working in a construction company, and I just went from there.
Interesting. And so when you first started, you didn't start in the role of project manager, right? I believe you started in the role of a product coordinator and estimator. So I'm wondering if you can kind of run through what your time was like in that role, and then maybe a little bit of insight into what the transition was like and how you went about going through that.
Yeah, so when I was on third year, I actually did a co-op. When I did my undergrad, I did the PEY program, the professional engineer. So I worked 16 months as a coordinator at Ellis Don. And it was a very big project, very big company. And it was really great. Like, it was a really good opportunity, good company. And it was more of, just even learning how construction operates, how documents are filed. It was more of an administrative thing. So when I finished that first year, I went back and I said, you know what, I don't know if this is for me, because I'm more of a technical kind of person. And I wasn't doing exactly what I thought I was going to do when I went to engineering school and worked in construction. But putting that aside, I still decided to go to the construction side of things, and I started as a coordinator again, but at a much smaller company, where it really gave me the opportunity to learn the entire process. Whereas when you work for a bigger company, you're kind of it's a much slower process. So you start a coordinator, it's probably going to take you a lot more years to become a project manager, but you're going to be working in bigger and more complicated things. Whereas if you work for a smaller contractor, you learn things a lot quicker, the whole process from start to close out, but it's not the same level of complexity and organization. So I started off as a coordinator in a smaller company, so I would get that full sense of start to finish, bidding, tendering, how it works, and I did a little bit of estimating too. And once I got that overall understanding of how things work, I felt like the smaller company wasn't exactly for me. I wanted something more complicated, building related. So I I changed to a company that does a lot bigger projects, and they gave me a really good opportunity, and that I was really lucky that they mentored me and encouraged me to become a project manager, and yeah, it was a quick transition. So yeah.
That's awesome. So I'm wondering about the transition. Like, was it a large jump going from the responsibilities of a product coordinator and doing some estimating to a product manager? And maybe that jump might have even been made bigger by switching companies? Or do you think that because of your time at the smaller company, getting a large amount of exposure, did you feel fully prepared and ready to make that jump?
No, it was definitely not. The experience was not didn't prepare me enough to be a project manager. I was definitely lost at the beginning, and it was a far stretch for me to be a project manager in the project that I'm working on for Estelle. But I had a lot of support, and you work really hard, and you got to put in those extra hours when you're starting out, and it paid off. But in construction is really ultimately it's an industry of experience. We don't sell any products, we don't manufacture nothing. All you have to offer is what your experience. So you need to do it once, and once you do it once, hopefully you pay enough attention, you'll catch most things, and you'll be pretty good for the next time.
And so I'm wondering, so you talked about a bit of that difficulty in adjusting right away. I'm wondering what your biggest takeaways from those first 3 or 6 months as a project manager are, if there's any significant, and what new project managers can expect during the transition into that role.
Yeah, so I would say the biggest thing is communication and information, like understanding who needs to be informed with what is what comes with experience. And anyone going through that transition, like, I guess my comment would be, you have to be very open to what people have to say, and you have to seek that that knowledge from other people, because you won't know who needs to get what and what could go wrong. Like, you can't imagine the chain of reactions that one thing causes. Like one small piece of information doesn't make it to the right person, and you don't even realize that person needs that information. So making all those connections is a very difficult thing at the beginning, when you don't really even understand what's happening. So I would say, take it slow. And if you don't want to take it slow and you want to take it fast, you really need the right support, or else, things can go wrong.
So you mentioned that support piece, which comes up quite often actually as an important factor in terms of rising up the corporate ladder, I guess you could call it, in construction. And I'm wondering, did you have anyone there as a support figure that you could really lead on? Did you maybe have a mentor when you were entering the industry? And if you didn't, do you think that would have been something that was valuable? And if you could go back, would you have pursued a relationship like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like my Mark and Anthony, they're the owners at Excel, where I work right now. And yeah, there's no way I would have been able to be a project manager there without the support. They were constantly, nudging, did you look at this? Did you look at that? Like, did you check on the lead times for these items? There's a pandemic going on. So all those things, like, you would think they're obvious, but sometimes they're not. Like, you think appliances would be readily available, but there's a huge issue in the industry right now with appliances. So all those things, like, it helps you look at the bigger picture, and you definitely need someone, at least for the first time.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, this can be a difficult question to answer. So if you don't have a direct answer, it's totally understandable. But for those who are entering the industry or have been looking for a mentor and don't currently have one, or might be struggling to form those relationships, how do you recommend people go out and find a mentor, find someone who can help guide them and help, as you said, remind them just of some of the most pertinent things that they may be forgetting?
I think this is it's more related to the organization. Like I'm sure there might be organizations out there that provide some kind of mentoring outside of the organization. But yeah, I think it starts with finding the right place where you feel comfortable and where you feel supported, because getting outside help is obviously very difficult unless you have a relative or someone that can help you. But it definitely starts in the organization you work in. And if you're not getting that support, you might want to reconsider, because at the end of the day, it's your reputation as well. And if you don't do well because the right environment is not there, it's not going to reflect on you as a professional. It's a big industry, but everyone knows each other as well. So you don't want to risk your reputation. You only get a chance once. So yeah, that's all I gotta say. Like, people get busy and sometimes they don't provide the right support, not because they don't want to, but it's a busy industry and everyone's time is pretty stretched. So you gotta take everything you can get and exploit it as much as you can.
Definitely. I want to pivot a little bit here towards kind of education and its role in the construction industry. And so I'm wondering if you could just dive in and give a little bit of insight into why you chose to pursue a master's in engineering and why you felt that would be valuable or applicable to your current role and responsibilities.
Yeah, so my master's, when I finished my undergrad, I was unsure, like I said, if I wanted to go into design or construction. So I started evaluating all these options. I applied for a master's of engineering at U of T, really because I didn't have a job at the time. And I was just applying. So it was, just in case I don't get a job, I'll work on my master's. I don't really want to waste my time. So I got accepted into my master's, and then I also got a job offer. So I didn't want to lose either one. So I ended up doing my master's kind of like an extended full-time. And it was really, really, it was really great, and it was worth it, because I was learning about construction documents, for example, construction law mainly in a class, and at the same time I was tendering the work, and I could see all the clauses that I was learning in school. I could see them in the tender, and I could understand a lot better. So I would definitely encourage people to do a master's. And I will say that you don't want to do it right after school, because you don't really get an appreciation of things. If you can work for a couple of years, I know it's hard to go back, or even doing it part-time if you have the time, it's the best way to do it, because you can really connect the two. If the more you learn, the more you can learn. Learning one thing enables you to learn from another thing. And that's when you connect the dots, is pretty incredible thing.
I think that really will hit close to home for a lot of people in terms of you discussing the value of learning at the same time as doing, where you can kind of be aware of the different important parts and then put it to work, the very next day or the next week on a project you're working on. And so I'm wondering, in connection with that idea of broader education, I'm wondering if you see the same value in pursuing certifications. So for example, getting Gold Seal certified or different industry certifications to kind of fill those education gaps. And if you think that provides the same value as pursuing something like a master's or something like that might, or do you see them as kind of differing levels of education and rounding yourself out, I guess I should say?
I think certifications, I've completed my project management professional certification, and it was definitely useful content to learn. I wouldn't say it's my primary, it would be something I would recommend over a master's. I think a master's provides you a lot more in-depth knowledge and overall is more valuable than a certification. But it's definitely, if you have the time and you're interested in the topic, I would definitely recommend pursuing it. I find that especially in a market that is very hot right now, it's you want to pursue more specific and work, you want to obtain more work experience as opposed to a certificate, because that's going to pay off a lot more in the workplace. But if you have the time, yeah, definitely a certification would help.
Awesome. So I'm wondering, you talked a little bit about getting that firsthand experience at the same time as getting the education, but I'm sure that there comes scenarios for some people where it's one or the other. They maybe don't have the opportunity to do a master's at the same time as working. And so I'm wondering, where do you kind of see the balance between seeking out more firsthand experience and getting more exposure to different aspects of the industry versus getting that formal education? Like, is there a time you think when one becomes more valuable than the other, or is it always kind of just dependent on what that person wants to focus on?
Yeah, I think absolutely you need experience first. You don't want to go into a master's and then you learn whatever the professor is telling you, but you won't have your own perspective and opinions on things. You need, I would say, at least, depends on the master's you want to do, but at least 2 to 3 years of experience. And then I always see the master's too as a way to pivot also. If you go 2, 3 years into a field and you don't necessarily like it, but you get a lot of exposure to certain things that are related to another industry you want to go to, a master's is a great opportunity to do that. And if you do your master's up front, say you finish engineering, you do your master's in construction, you go into construction, you realize you don't like it, then what do you do, right? So it's definitely, I think it's definitely good protracting that to later and finding out what you like in your career, and then use your master's to either further advance your knowledge, or you can use it to pivot. Like I've been even thinking, I like construction side of things, but I also like the real estate side of things. And there's a finance side that I don't see. There's a lot of things. I work with a lot of developers that, handle all that stuff, and I don't really get to participate in that. So I've thought, like, if I wanted to get into it, it would be very complementary. I could do a master's in real estate, and I understand the product. I understand how building works. And it's just a good way to pivot as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's a really good point of the value on top of the education that you're getting is that it provides an easy way to kind of pivot or focus on new areas.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, again, another somewhat pivot back to your experience in the industry. So when you were a project coordinator, and then when you were doing a little bit of that estimating work, what was it that you did that you felt prepared you to take on the role of project manager? And as adjacent to that, I'm wondering, were there specific skills you focused on during your time before becoming a project manager that you really focused on developing to prepare yourself?
I think as a coordinator, managing contracts was probably a really good thing that I focused on. I really try to understand how the contracts work. You have your CCDC 17 or whatever CCDC you're using, standard conditions of the contract, and then you amend them, and then you have your scopes of work, you understand the documents, the tendering process, and a lot of the project manager's work is procurement. So understanding exactly how contracts are drafted and worded, and the implications of the order of documents, and understanding the information that you have. That's one thing I focused on when I was a coordinator. And and nothing really prepares you for when you have to do it on your own, but it really helped. And the administrative side of things too, like you're doing it, what works, what doesn't work, how to manage new drawings. you got to understand the volume of information and the manpower you need to handle it. And when you're there, it's easy to say from above, you got to do all this, but then, the person has a limited amount of time, and sometimes they're not doing it because not because they don't want to, but because they don't have the time. So.
Well, it's good that you're able to keep that in mind, having some of that experience and trying to spread that message. So this is a two-parter question. So feel free to answer with one word, or if you want to go into depth on the first part, you for sure can. But the first part of it is, do you find your job stressful?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think just the nature of the work is high stress because timelines, and it's like a big monster that you can't control, and you have to somehow try to get into a rhythm that will take you to where you want to go, but it's just a rhythm. You can't really control everything that's happening. There's the magnitude of the amount of people involved, and I think that lack of control is the stressful part. You can't see it all. You can't review every drawing, every instruction. You can't check. There's hundreds of people working on site. You can't check what everyone's doing. So there's always that unknown. What if this guy didn't connect this pipe right, and the building floods when we turn on the sprinklers? So it's that unknown that I don't think you can ever get rid of that, and it's the nature of the business. And all you can do is mitigate and assess the risk and try to control it as much as you can.
Absolutely. And that's a very common answer, especially the part on, you can't just eliminate that stress. It's virtually impossible to come with the role. Yeah. But one of the things that you can do, fortunately, and a lot of people try to and have their own methods, is handle that stress. So I'm wondering, as you've gone through your career, how have you handled the stress of your job? Have there been specific methods you found that work really well? How do you best go about dealing with the stress?
On a personal level, I think exercising is really, really good thing. I know with COVID is hard, but it really helps you, direct your energy somewhere else. You also you have to have the right social support, and hopefully you have the right environment at home, because there's nothing worse than dealing with stress at work and then dealing with stress at home. It just compounds. I think we can all handle so much stress, and after we get above that threshold, is you're off the rails. So I think, yeah, from a personal level, you just try to keep it to within your threshold, and if you can't handle it, you gotta step back a little bit. And in a professional level, you have to be as organized as you can, and you need to accept that you can't control everything, and that you can only put certain processes in place. And if they don't work out, you adjust them. But letting go of that control is probably the best way to manage the stress. Like, you need to understand you can't control everything, and there's things that happen, and you just need to deal with them as they come up and learn from them. And you can't blame yourself for everything that goes wrong, because there will be things that go wrong.
I think that's a really important point, and something that we can all do well to keep in mind, even outside of construction. Just some of that is about relinquishing the control over things you don't actually have control over, and not blaming yourself for it. I think that's a very pertinent message. So thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering, were there any pieces of advice someone gave you that really shaped or helped your journey through the construction industry?
Yeah, I had a professor at U of T. He's a chemical engineer, but he was teaching a leadership course. And he gave us this really good book called The Fifth Discipline, and then he explained all about it. And he explains that you have to look at things in terms of a system. And unfortunately, the systems that we work in are so complex that we don't really understand the effects of our actions, the consequences of our actions. So he really taught me to look at things in systems. And when it's like a sick person, and he's sick, but you don't know what it is. And it might be something from his diet. It might be something from his smokes. You don't really know what is causing the problem, because it's so complex. The body is so complex, so you don't really understand what's happening. And I think it's stepping back and looking at things as a system and see what has more leverage, like what is really causing this problem. And sometimes the solution is only making the problem worse, and the more you put pressure on it, the worse it gets. So I would say step back, look at things as a system, and try to understand the real cause of the problem. And don't just blame the first thing that comes to mind, because most of the time that is not the problem, especially with people. And yeah, that's the main piece of advice that I can give.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that that's something a lot of people find very valuable and interesting to hear. Quite frankly, I think it's very applicable outside of just construction and more broadly in life and in our society. So I think it's a very valuable piece of advice. I have one last question that I want to ask you. So this is more so about where you were at when you were first entering the industry, or maybe during those first couple of weeks as a project manager. But I'm wondering, what were the most pertinent or really burning questions and things you couldn't find answers to that you really wanted to know when you were first starting out in the industry?
I think knowledge, it's more knowledge specific in terms of each trade is its own specialty, and you're somehow supposed to know everything about each trade, yet each trade takes years to learn. Like the electrician, he needs to be an apprentice for however many years, same like the plumber. And when you jump into it, you're somehow supposed to learn a little bit of everything. So I think it's hard to grasp that knowledge and understand the basics of how systems work, because you need to understand those basics to be able to tackle problems, especially when you're managing contracts. There's change orders, there's things that are legitimate, things that are not legitimate. You need to be able to distinguish between those two things, and you need to have a minimum understanding of how things work. So that knowledge is very difficult to acquire, and there's different ways of doing it. You could do courses, but it's all very time consuming. So it takes a lot of time to learn these things, and that's why it's hard to be fast tracked in an industry where you need so much knowledge to really do it well.
Very, very true, and I appreciate you sharing that. Well, that's it for my questions. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate you being honest and going in depth on your questions. I feel like there's a lot here that a lot of different people at different stages of their careers can take and internalize and really make something of. So I want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to share such valuable insights, and I really appreciate you joining us.
Awesome, no problem.
Thanks so much.
Zach.
We'll be in contact later.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.